Between Life and Death by Jaclyn. Chapter 46. My search of the bakery turned up empty. It occurred to me that after all of these years, I had no idea where Joe's actual home was. I decided I would ask Ezra when I returned, looking for another missing male. I did a mental check for Soren. But still, there was nothing. Sighing to myself, shoulders sagged in defeat, I glanced up at the sign gently swinging above. It read Firster's Food Shop, the crisp white paint so fresh it still looked wet. The food shop used to belong to the Heyman family. I had never thought the owner, Rose, a woman who had been widowed in her younger years, would agree to sell it. She and her 2 sons had poured their heart and soul into this place, much like Joe had with his bakery. And yet, she'd sold her beloved shop. I was reminded, in that moment, that time waited for no one, and things continued to change. I cursed change under my tongue as I trotted up one lonely step and inside. The door, which looked brand new, was propped open, letting in the cool, autumn breeze. Vaughn followed me inside, ducking under the too short doorframe. Years ago, the shop had been much smaller. When Rose and her husband, whose name I could not recall, as he died when I was young, purchased the shop, they also bought the building beside it. They knocked out the middle wall, joining the two, making it the largest food shop in Maristone. Not that there was much for competition. Not much had changed inside, other than the new door, a fresh coat of paint on the walls, and a few reorganized shelves. I suppose that was to be expected, as Rose had kept this place working like a well-oiled wheel. A few people waited in line at the front counter, while others drifted about. Some wandered aimlessly, pondering if they should buy this head of cabbage or that sack of potatoes, and others were more determined, grabbing what they needed before moving on to the next. "Sage," greeted a familiar male voice. I smiled, recognizing it as soon as I heard it. There was no mistaking that accent anywhere, poised with clipped tones, spoken clearly and briskly and proper. It was almost melodic, like it had a ring to it. "Thomas James Firster," I said by way of greeting as I walked toward him, more excited to see him than I should be, considering how things ended between us last spring. Thomas was handsome, with his sand-colored hair, deeply tanned skin, and sparkling, clear blue eyes. He looked like summer, or what I imagined a day at the beach must look like. Not that I had ever been to a beach, unless the weedy bank of the lake counted as one. Thomas had a small gap between his 2 front teeth, and where most people couldn't pull a tooth gap off, he sure could. It added to his charm. He was dressed casually in brown trousers, and a white tunic that hugged his lean, lightly muscled frame. He flashed a grin, that space between his teeth making its debut. "Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" He looked me up and down for added emphasis. I smiled warmly. "It's good to see you too." I raised my hands, gesturing to the shop. "This is all yours now, I take it?" He grinned proudly, hands bracing on his hips as he took a look around, as if he were still walking in a dream, and he had to survey it to make sure it was real. "Yes, she sure is. As of last week, actually." "That's wonderful. Congratulations. I remember you talking about wanting to open up a food shop last spring. This is even better, really. It has everything you need," I said, feeling every ounce of my excitement for him. "How did you get Rose to agree to sell it?" His smile shifted from daylight bright to a thin, downturned line. "You haven't heard then?" "Heard what?" I asked, my brow lowered, hooked down by his solemn expression. "Last month, Rose's 2 boys were conscripted under the order of the king. The wagon that was carrying them was involved in an accident. The boys managed to escape, along with some others. Charles and Danny came back to Maristone, rather than turning themselves into the king, thus evading the draft, which, as you know, is a criminal offense." His accent thickened, and I thought he sounded a bit judgmental, like he disagreed with their choice to return, like they should have handed themselves over to be slaughtered. It didn't sit well with me. "Rose hid them for 2 weeks in the cellar beneath." He tapped his foot on the wood plank, and my gaze drifted to the pristine floor. I imagined her 2 wide-eyed sons hidden in the dark down there. How frightened they must have been, Rose included. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. Thomas's arms knitted loosely over his chest as he continued. "For 2.5 weeks, Rose refused to open the shop. You know how this little town is. People started talking until finally the truth washed up, and it quickly spread. When the soldiers heard, they kicked the door in, searched the place, and dragged the boys and Rose out into the streets." "What did they do with them?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder to the new door that was proudly swung open, allowing customers inside to shop. The evidence of what happened here so easily erased. Evading the draft of the king and aiding in the evasion are both punishable by death. There was no sympathy in his tone. His reply hit me like a landslide, threatening to wash my feet out. If I had any tears left in me, I would have wept right there. And then for Rose and her poor boys. Vaughn moved behind me on soundless steps, his hand drifting to the small of my back, a gentle, steadying touch, like a tall, ancient tree, sturdy and sure, bracing me. Casually, he glanced around, his gaze pointedly wandering before it lazily drifted to the male standing before me. "Hi there," Thomas said by way of greeting, his gaze darting between Vaughn and me, trying to piece together what we were to one another. As if Vaughn noticed it, too, his hand shifted from the small of my back, his arm draping over my shoulders, intimately tugging me closely into him, staking his claim, answering Thomas's question without so much as a word. "Hello, Tom," Vaughn said flatly, using his name like he knew him. Judging by the off-kilter look on Thomas's face, he did not. Vaughn, the predatory male, was playing his big cat, little mouse games. Thomas's face turned ashen. "Sorry, Sage, it was nice chatting with you, but I have to get back to work." He scuttled back, raised his hands in defense, and then stumbled away, nearly tripping over the basket of granadilla, a fruit with an inviting, bright orange exterior, but filled with gray, slimy seeds on the inside. They tasted like frog eggs. I didn't know why the villagers ate them. Even Ezra wouldn't touch them. "I look forward to seeing you again, Tom," Vaughn called out as Thomas darted into the back. His words sounded like a promise, like it was inevitable that they would meet again. I peered up at him accusingly. "What did you do to him?" A careless, one-shoulder shrug. "Nothing he didn't deserve." Vaughn walked over to a row of slanted wicker baskets. He inspected the fruit, apples of course, discarding a few rotten ones on the sparkling, just swept floor, to my complete horror. Finally, he plucked a shiny, red apple from the pile. He brought it to his mouth and sunk his teeth into its flesh, eating it right there, in the middle of the store. I made a disgruntled sound, muttering a few insults under my breath. Vaughn raised a black brow. "I'm sorry, little goddess." A sinful smile twisted the corners of his full, sensual mouth. He rolled his wrist towards me, offering the half-devoured apple. "Would you like a bite?" My stomach grumbled, begging me to partake. I almost reached out, almost pressed my lips against the decadent-looking fruit, but the way he said it, it sounded like one simple bite would cost me my life. And with Vaughn, the king of inky deals, one could never be too sure. "No thank you," I declined before I briskly walked away. I could hear him chuckle behind me, followed with a crunch as he took another bite. I quickened my pace as if the hounds of the spirit realm were nipping at my ass. Vaughn and I returned to the footpath carved by my feet and Caleb's, heading back towards the cottage. I carried a sack of potatoes, while Vaughn carried the rest, the basket and 2 heaped burlap sacks, a wispy leaf of cabbage sticking out on top, bobbing as he walked. Like this, my otherworldly, ancient warrior looked almost mundane. I smiled softly, deciding I liked it. I paused, my mind backing up since when did Vaughn become my, as if I had a right to stake a claim. And yet, when Thomas had looked at us, wondering what we were, Vaughn had no problem staking his. "The shopkeeper has feelings for you," Vaughn stated flatly. It was the first thing he had said since we started our walk back. Apparently, I wasn't the only one thinking about Thomas and relationships and claims. "I'm aware," I said, watching Vaughn, who looked less than pleased, annoyed, even. I gargled a thought, swishing it around. Was this mighty, powerful male jealous? I smirked. Now that was a juicy one. I had to know. I decided to test my theory. "We courted last spring. A record 3 months. It was the longest relationship I have ever been in." Vaughn snorted at that. I quirked a brow before I continued delving in. Thomas's father was a shopkeeper, and his grandfather before him. He grew up in one. He dreamed of running his own, just like his father. I'm happy he was able to accomplish his goal. I paused, pivoting to the next part of my plan. "I'm sure you are wondering why we broke up." I doubted he wanted to hear anymore. Yet this was too fun to give up now. I'd get him back for his apple antics, one way or another. I prattled on. Caleb didn't really like him. Also, he thought he was a bit old for me. I didn't see the problem with the 9-year gap between us. Many women marry older men. And, whoa, this was going to get dirty. He was pretty good in bed. Vaughn stopped dead. "Goddess divine, you are jealous, aren't you?" I exclaimed, reveling in my victory. It was short-lived. Vaughn dropped the basket and the sacks. His boot heel crunched a string bean as he strode towards me, rearing me back, like a helpless sheep driven through a chute. With my back firmly pressed against a tree, Vaughn stood at my front, towering. His sleeves were rolled back, exposing his tattooed forearms. He gripped the trunk on either side of me, caging me in, the bark itself gasping under his grip. No. He bared his teeth. I am territorial. I eyed those sharp white canines. Why did they seem longer than before? My throat bobbed. Something felt stuck there. I wondered if I had forgotten, and taken a bite of that apple, and now it was lodged in my throat. What's the difference? I asked, fixated by those incredible incisors. In the deepest crevices of my mind, the places filled with empty paper and cobwebs, there was something, a memory perhaps, that seemed to stretch and stir. Those teeth, I had felt them sink into me before. An indecent blush dusted my cheeks as liquid heat pooled low. Jealousy is when you covet something that is not yours, Vaughn said, lowering his face, hovering his lips just over mine. His fingers weaved into my hair. Territorial is protecting what is yours. He tipped my head back, exposing the length of my neck. And you, sweet angel, are forever mine. And that was when he bit me. A flash of sharp pain seared into my neck, and just when I was about to scream, a moan escaped instead as pleasure swept over me, rapturous and fast. He scattered my thoughts like ash on the wind, with his teeth embedded in my neck. His free hand moved to my waist, and he pulled me against his hard, forceful edges. His other hand kept my head in place as he drank from me. I didn't fight him. No, freely, I let him. In return, he took me higher, my body trembling at the tidal wave of oncoming climax. It was too much. Frightened by the height of it, I braced myself for impact as it dragged me under into a release of bliss so pure, so intense, my legs gave out underneath me. I would have fallen if Vaughn had not held me to him. His tongue slid across the throbbing wound, healing it in one sweep, but allowing the tenderness of it to remain, a stinging sensation reminding me of his claim. Mine. Slowly, he lifted his head. With my blood on his lips, and the taste of me in his mouth, he peered down at me, those emerald green eyes framed in heavy black lashes. I felt a sense of satisfaction seeing the deep, rich color return. His tongue swept over his lips, his eyes closing briefly, and when he opened them, there was nothing human about them, only beast. Do you want a taste? He asked, lowering his lips just over mine. I didn't need to think about it. My arms wrapped around his neck as my mouth clashed against his, our teeth clacking with the impact. His tongue tangled with mine, and the taste of copper bloomed inside my mouth. I didn't know if it was because Vaughn was kissing me, but the taste of my blood was somehow sweeter, as if a droplet of honey had been added to it. I reached for the hem of his shirt, pulling it up, breaking our kiss so I could lift it over his head. His lips came crashing down on mine as I tossed his black tunic carelessly to the ground. His hands moved to my pants, shoving them down while my hands worked on his belt. He snarled when I broke the kiss to get a better look at my fumbling fingers. Fuck this, he growled, and suddenly, my clothes were gone. Just like that, not even a snap of his fingers, just gone. That was going to take some getting used to. Then again, with Vaughn, I doubted I would ever get used to these things. Bark scratched against my skin, grating my already electrified nerves as the cool air drifted over me, stirring a shiver, pebbling my nipples. But it wasn't just the cool air that was to blame. It was the way Vaughn was looking at me, like I was a juicy red apple, ripe for plucking. Replace the PL with an F, and you get the idea. Slowly, black lashes lowered, his gaze trailing down the length of my body, my skin catching in his inferno. So fucking beautiful, little goddess, he murmured darkly. My gaze snagged on those dangerously stacked abs, so chiseled, I could use them as a washboard. So chiseled, I wanted to rub up all over them, skin upon skin, flesh upon flesh. My fingertips leisurely slid down his torso, exploring, learning, his muscles contracting under my touch. When I reached his pants, I looked up and asked, "Why am I the only one naked?" Vaughn gave me a sinful smirk, the kind that dropped my heartbeat, all the way down to my core, electrifying it. His hand roamed down the length of my body, those ringed fingers slipping between my folds, spreading them, a finger teasing my entrance, testing the wetness. Because, little goddess, his finger dipped inside. "You are not ready to have sex with me," I gasped at the feel of him, at that intrusive large finger, pushing its way in, claiming and damning me all in one stroke. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice as shaky as my inhale. "It means..." He pressed a second finger in, stretching me, and I moaned. His were so much better than mine, they were so much bigger, longer. "I'm not like the men you fucked before." He twirled his fingers just right, working that sacred spot inside, the one that made it hard to stand. "Vaughn!" I cried out, his sinful ministrations causing my eyes to roll back. My hand grabbed hold of his forearm, and I felt those steely muscles work as he pumped his fingers. There was something about feeling that incredible strength in his arm, and knowing what he was doing to me that painted me all shades of wild. Cool metal bit into the bottom of my chin, forcing me to look up at him. I'm no 5-incher kitten, he pressed a third finger inside, stretching my walls beyond reason. And as much as I need to fuck you, to bury myself in you, to claim you, I have no intentions of doing so until your body is ready for mine. I exhaled a shaky breath, and he inhaled it, his mouth capturing mine, consuming my moans, consuming me, his hand wrapped around the base of my neck, keeping me there as he kissed me so purposefully, so intently. I no longer knew where he began and I ended. He withdrew his fingers, not enough to slide out, but just enough to relieve the pressure, and then he began to work them in expert, soft strokes, gently breaking me in, thrust by thrust. Slowly, his tempo increased, until those 3 ruthless fingers were pounding pleasure into my sex, forcing me to accept what he was offering. Vaughn was an inescapable storm. He was going to consume me completely, and I would let him. My breathing turned erratic as my hips bucked against his hand, meeting his powerful thrusts. I weaved my fingers into his hair, securing myself to him, bringing his blazing inferno closer. And still it wasn't close enough. I wanted him in me, everywhere, touching and tasting and taking. He tore his lips from mine, trailing passionate, scalding kisses over my jaw and down my neck, mapping out his lust. When he ran his thick tongue over the sensitive bite mark, hot, white rapture surged straight to my core. Coupled with his wicked fingers, my body exploded with an orgasm so strong that my breathing turned labored and my knees gave out. Vaughn caught me before I could fall. That's it, kitten. Give it to me. He purred as I rode out those powerful tremors working their way throughout my body, each one starting where his fingers stroked me, drawing my climax out in length and intensity. When I finished, he withdrew his fingers, leaving me empty and clenching at nothing, searching for him. A gush of arousal slipped out, coating my thighs. His hand slid between my legs, his fingertips tracking the extent of my pleasure. What a beautiful little mess you've made, he teased, clicking his tongue. Shall I clean you up? Before I could ask what he meant, the towering warrior lowered to his knees. It was like watching a king relinquishing his throne, and it did inexplainable things to me. Adrenaline laced with power forged within my soul, and it was a potent combination, spread for me. He wasn't asking, nor did he need to. Without a second thought, I widened my stance. Good girl, he praised. One large hand cuffed the back of my leg, holding me there as he brought his mouth to that sensitive part of my inner thigh, coated in my wetness. His heated breath skittered over my skin in warning before he ran his tongue upwards, lapping me up. Lick by incredible lick. I held onto his sturdy shoulders, my jaw unhinged as his tongue laved my skin, cleaning me, all the while tasting me, savoring me. I realized in that moment that I was forever fucked, because no male could ever compete to the one kneeling before me. When he was done, but still positioned between my legs, he looked up, his incredible green eyes meeting mine. He purred in that throaty, sated tone. On the contrary, little goddess, the victory is all mine. And truly, it was. After I regained sensation in my legs, and somewhat of a half-functioning brain, I got dressed, and then we gathered the food, and continued onwards, leaving the squash string bean behind. Forget Vaughn being a demigod. He was something of his own design. I'm tempted to ask what you are, I said ever so casually, like I hadn't just had my neck tapped into like a keg full of red wine, and my nether regions roughly and thoroughly finger-banged. But I have a feeling it rhymes with something that goes bump in the night. Vaughn tipped his head back, and laughed, my blood and arousal now gone from his lips, although the deep green color of his eyes remained. Actually, I don't think I want to know what you are. I followed up, banking on the whole ignorance being bliss thing. Besides, my mind had been ransacked with things I had yet to process. Then we can revisit this topic another time. I will, however, tell you 2 truths, Vaughn said, tipping his head to the side in that I own all I survey look. A look that only he could pull off. I waited for him to continue, all the while taking him in. There were times when he looked dark and menacing and warrior-like, but right now, he looked ethereal. He had called me an angel moments ago, yet it was him that looked like one now. His sinfully handsome features framed by his black hair blowing freely in the wind. The first is that you have horrible taste in men. His black lashes flickered, eyes shifting pointedly to me. I scowled, instantly retracting the angel tag. Bastard was more like it. The second truth is that Tom is the one who ratted to the soldiers that the original owner was hiding her sons. My feet slowed. Why would Thomas tell the soldiers about Rose? Vaughn gave me a look as if to say, really? I shook my head. I know he wanted a food shop. But he wouldn't be that desperate, that low. No. He wouldn't do that, I denied, my words less than convincing. Wouldn't he? Vaughn asked over his shoulder as he continued to walk forward. I didn't know. If he had. Something fierce filled my veins. If he had told on Rose, if he was the reason she and her sons were dead, just so that he could acquire her shop. I felt murderous and sick with nausea. I'd slept with that prick. I sped up my turtle speed and caught up to Vaughn, all the while fighting the bile rising in my throat. My face probably looked as sour as the taste in my mouth. Vaughn glanced at me. As I said, horrible taste in men. I like you, I jabbed. He nodded, flashing those wickedly sharp teeth. Exactly.